that's okay with everyone. Just make sure it definitely says record. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we've only got an hour, so thanks for everyone for turning up, and we really appreciate your feedback last time. So this is the second and last of the Student Digital Experience Insight expert groups. We've only got, let's say we've got an hour. I've got a slide here next. Just bring this up properly. It's a bit slow. Here we go. So it'll cover for 40 minutes, and it's more over to all of you to contribute here. We want to find out what the key messages and action points are for providers that's come out of the summary findings. So last Friday, I sent out a summary of the findings, and I've got them on a slide here again as well. And we've tried to make a summary of the summaries, to be honest. And it's very, very difficult because there's so many different things going on, sort of aid understanding. So that's 40 minutes. Then I know we covered this before, but maybe just to go through again possible future briefing papers. So I give some examples, and it'd be good to get some feedback if you think there's something there that hasn't been done or it's not going to be done in the main student report. That'd be really useful to do in the future, so we can kind of release sort of statistical or analysis briefings throughout the year. And the final part for 10 minutes is on the value of the questions, and that's going to be Helen, who I don't think's here yet, and Helen was one of the people who designed the initial question sets at the beginning with Tabitha, who is here, and the rest of the GIST team, and has been revising it in subsequent years. So just want some feedback from you all on the questions, so we can go in. I'll be sort of creating the actual meeting, and just to say also that Claire Killen will be answering queries, and she's been helping me with this presentation. Has been invaluable.
Mark, I have a question just in case we run out of time or something. Is with regard to the data and the outcome. I understand now we are working on the final document, the final papers. Yeah. But I just wanted to ask, when this is published, we can use different forums, or, for example, to summarize the findings ourselves. You know, like linking it with maybe some academic research. I was thinking the alt blog, these kind of things. But my question is, would it be okay to do so once the publication is there? Because the only thing we will do is summarizing the findings which are already there.
Yeah, once it's made public, that's absolutely fine, and we can discuss it at Alt-C as well. So yeah, that'd be really interesting to see.
Okay. When do you think this will be published?
It will be published the 3rd of September at the Alt-C conference. That's when it's publicly available.
Oh, okay. No, I understand then.
Okay.
And the only other thing would be that we reference where it's come from. I'm sure you'd do that anyway, but that's the protocols.
Okay, thanks a lot. So what we got here is the different themes. You can see there's quite a lot on there, and this is a summary of a summary. These are the main findings, so hopefully you've had a chance to look through these. On the right-hand side, we've put down some, I suppose, pointers to what we think the maybe key messages are and action points for providers. So what we really want, I mean, maybe 10 minutes on each of the slides, and there's 4 different slides, is from all of you feedback. You can speak or put something in the group chat as well as to what you think, what are the so what's from this, what can institutions see from this and say, yes, this is something we can actually do, actual actions. So I don't know if anyone wants to make a start on that point, or even elaborate on some of the points that we've already brought up on the right hand side. So we've got here like questions on the digital tools or apps that the HE students are more likely to use them. The most popular digital activity for FE students was making notes and recordings, and for HE students it was accessing lecture notes and recorded lectures. I think it's also interesting about the use of personal devices as well, where that HE students are much more likely to own laptops personally than FE students. FE students are more likely to have desktop computers, and also that 5% of FE students say they don't own any of the personal devices that were listed. So I think that's a really important finding and an issue maybe for FE in terms of access. And we've also got some information here on assistive tech, where the needs seem to be greater for assistive tech amongst HE students, but HE students were less likely to say their institution provided them with the support as well. So there's something interesting in there. So what kind of key messages do people think comes out of that for actions for institutions. I see a lot going on in the chat window. Anyone want to say anything? So Sarah, did anything else on that list there, or Tabitha want to join in or say that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think that point that Kate's picking up is really interesting, and I know, Helen, you've responded to that. And yes, I think a lot of what we're seeing, I think, goes back to supporting students around the effective use of the tools and apps that they might be using for their learning. And I think that it's interesting, and I'll see if Helen agrees, but I think some of what we're finding coming through still in line, I think, with some of the very early research we did, that, you know, students are still asking and still needing support by their tutors around the effective use of technology for learning, and are very much guided by their tutors for that. And where this is not necessarily happening, it does point back to the fact that, you know, that staff need to have that confidence. They need to be explicit about why the technology is being used, and not just making those assumptions that students automatically are seeing the benefits of technology being used. And I think that that's still a theme that we really need to reiterate about, the being explicit and articulating the benefits of technology, how it's being used in the course, how it's going to support students in moving forward with their career progression and when they move into the workplace, and having that narrative right the way through. But Helen might want to say a little bit more about that.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Helen, but yeah.
Hi there.
Sorry, I was having problems with Wi-Fi. Well, I'm only looking at the qualitative data. So, and of course, the qualitative data is summative across, you know, lots of universities and colleges that took part. And I always think it's probably more relevant to look at your own qualitative data, because certainly when you go through the qualitative data, you see how very different the issues are in different places. You can kind of go through waves, and you think, oh, this is a huge issue for students, and then you go through a different wave and you realise you're in a different kind of part of the institutional landscape. I mean, I think for me, the issues that are coming up with Bring Your Own Device, which a few people have come up, are changing through the years. So an awful lot of HE students that have their own devices are asking for the capacity to download software onto those devices. They're, you know, to have licenses or license keys, or subsidized or free access to kind of specialist software or to generalist software that they can use on campus. And they want, you know, they sort of say, well, since we're using our own devices, you know, we really want all the same stuff on our devices that we can have on campus. And that's more of the issue that's coming up with Bring Your Own Device. It's around access to software rather than what we were seeing a few years ago, which was more around a lack of support for, you know, knowing how to use your device, I guess. So I think the issues are changing. I think the issues for FE students cluster much more around just having a working, reliable network computer available to me. So, you know, we're seeing really different issues there. And some of the sort of headlines are the same, but there's definitely a nuance year on year as to what the focus of those requests are, I would say, looking at the call anyway.
Thanks, Jonathan, as well. Your comment about there seems to be a theme about lower access to their own devices with FE, perhaps a different strategy needed for FE itself. And yeah, there is obviously, it's further on a question about compatibility and issues of, compatibility with devices.
I think it is an important one to raise in FE, because, you know, I think there obviously is a difference in resourcing. And I think, you know, thinking about the multiple layers of audience that we have for this report, you know, from a GIST perspective, we're also looking at what key messages we can pull out to inform those above us and government, and, you know, feeding into some of the expectations that the various different sort of funding councils have. So, you know, I think that we still need to flag up the discrepancy that is interestingly still coming through with the FE access and provision and Wi-Fi, which does really boil down to, in part, the resourcing, but possibly in some cases as well. I think it's also pointing back to the understanding that senior leaders have around the importance of digital and how it is and how it can affect their students' experience. So I think, there's some useful drivers and nudges that can help us sort of move forward this agenda with those audiences as well.
Thanks for that, Sarah. It's really useful. I know I'm being really strict with time here. It's 10 minutes for each one. So, and you can always email me comments afterwards, and we can incorporate those in the next couple of days. Theme 2, when it comes up on here. We're on to number 2, yeah. Okay, is you've got the range of questions here about digital in the institution. So we've got the main attitudinal question about how students are rating their digital provision, and 72% of FE rate it above average, but 87% of HE. We've got the questions here about the most likely support for students, when we see that lecturers are for both groups is the most likely source, but there are differences you can see here as well. We've got the issue again, it always comes up about reliable Wi-Fi was accessible to only 71% of FE students. The qualitative analysis reveals that access to computers on campus, Wi-Fi reliability and stable software are the top issues for FE students. For HE students, it's availability of lecture recordings, and they expect these to be available as well. And this other one here, but only 53% of FE students agree that their institution supported them to use their own digital devices, which is what we've been talking about previously. So does anyone want to come in here about any comments about key messages here?
Mark, a couple of points. I think here it would be a good point to highlight that lecturers are still needed, but the magnificent work that lecturers are doing, just supporting students, mentoring their education, because in the previous one we have the most popular activity was recorded lectures, which I totally agree. But I think hearing these points is a good opportunity to highlight that the importance of lecturers. And I think with regard to the differences between higher education and FE, yeah, I think they say online health and well-being services, but it's more about online services in general, which are offered by the institutions. Rather than limiting to only health and well-being. I don't know in FE up to what point students have apps, or they can register online, they can do things online, or they have to do it physically.
Right. Are you saying about the support the lecturers given stuff above and beyond the academic and digital support?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Is it in relation to the support that academics or lecturers provide?
No, it's when we talk about digital institutions, when they say they don't have access to online health and well-being services,
okay,
it's only we focus on those kind of services, or in general, the digital institution, that there is not so much need for doing certain processes such as matriculation, register, face-to-face, or we don't have data to comment on any other services. Probably not.
Not on the other services. Okay. Sorry, so come in there?
No, I understand. We only have data for online health and well-being services then.
I mean, the professional staff survey has questions about different areas from the other perspective, but this is what we have here at the moment. But we are looking across the different questionnaires.
Okay, no, I understand then. We say that for online health and well-being is fine.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone want to come in on that or another question? Okay. I just want to go back, Sue, one of your comments here about assistive technologies. Unclear why we conclude that HE are less likely to say their institution provided support. I haven't got the question actually in front of me now. I've got the screen on, but the question asked about of those. First, it asked them the question about their needs in relation to assistive tech, whether it's absolute or sometimes needed, and yes or no. And then what happened is the ones that actually said yes, we do have needs in relation to assistive technology. It's the percentage of those then that actually said has their institution provided them with support. And I don't think the question goes any further than that. Does that help? I don't know, Tabitha, you got the question in front of you at all? Okay, I'm just going through the other. I'm not a chance to look at the group chat. Just going through it.
I think again there's some interesting comments coming up around where students go for support with digital. And of course, we had slightly amended the question this year to look at where do they go most for their support. I think some comments coming up there in terms of do staff know that they are the first port of call for students, ensuring that they can signpost through to the appropriate person or support area. So there's quite a bit, and Helen, I'm just reading some of your comments through that are quite valuable. And I think it is also flagging up that, that students are seeing still their tutors as, one of the ports of call to get that advice and guidance, as we were saying earlier, and ensuring that staff feel confident to be able to do that, or if not, know where they can signpost through other support.
And I don't know whether it's of interest, but I know that in response to previous years' local data, some institutions are putting more effort and resource into clarifying their online support systems to try and make them more obvious and signpost them more clearly.
Hi, it's Helen. I was just going to make the comment that, so I'm looking again at the free text data, and there's never very many comments about support year on year. I think they were particularly low this year. There's often some quite nice comments about IT support and how great IT support is. There's very rarely anything negative about IT support. But I think what I try to do is to read some other comments as though they might be a cry for support without students actually using those terms. So particularly comments about, needing to learn how to use the software, often quite self-deprecating comments about students saying about themselves, oh, I struggle. The assumption is we know how to do everything and I struggle. So it's not a direct request for support, but clearly in there I think there's an implication that not all students are as aware of what the software is they might use or the platforms or systems, and not all students feel they have a really clear introduction to what they might use. So there's still comments from students saying I had to ask another student how to do this and so on. So I think it's interesting that students don't write about the support they would like. When you say what should we improve, they rarely write about more support as something they want. But I think when you read into their comments, you can kind of see some of the areas that they maybe aren't getting the support they need.
That's really interesting, Helen, isn't it? That it's still picking up that assumption. And, just having spoken at quite a few sort of events and conferences recently around the country, there is still almost a sense of surprise when we say that, students are not all completely confident and they do still need that support. And how are you assessing, the digital capabilities or digital skills of the students? And that's still, although we've been saying it for many years, it's still coming through as, oh, actually we don't. Oh, there's still quite a lot of surprise when we say that. So I think that that's a message that is still important to reiterate.
I think there's almost a stereotype, especially when we're talking about younger students here, not stereotyping all students as being young, of course, but for younger students, generationally, we think they're all completely tech savvy, and maybe they are, but maybe not on the particular tools they have to use in education, which is slightly different.
No, and I think what's interesting as well is that this is being validated by our digital capability work, and through the questions that students are self-assessing themselves in our digital capability discovery tool, that again, we are seeing this coming through quite strongly. So in a way, we've got two different sources of data that's coming through, but very much validating some, similar issues here.
Okay, thanks for that. That's really, really useful feedback there. I'm just going to move on to theme 3. There's always a lag between actually doing it. So this is about the digital on their course. Again, this is a very hard one to summarize, but there's some really interesting findings in there. So there's questions about the VLE, that only 41% of FE students agree they relied on their VLE to do the coursework, quite a contrast with 72% for HE. For me, it was around the careers side that I found particularly interesting. So very low percentages of students feel that digital skills are important for their chosen career when it comes to FE, and only 40% feel their courses prepare them for the digital workplace. They're quite similar percentages. But with HE, it's really interesting because 70% of them feel that their digital skills are important for their chosen career, which is actually still an underestimate of reality. But in contrast, only 42% of them are feeling their course prepares them for the digital workplace, and a sizable 19% disagree. And I personally find that quite surprising. There are only around 3 in 10, or around about a third for both, are saying that they're told what digital skills they need before they start their course. Relatively low percentages are saying regular opportunities to review and update their digital skills. So, I mean, yeah, I think there's lots of different things in this slide here, but around the career side, I found particularly, there's something going on here, which is, for the future of the country and for them and as individuals, that needs to be addressed. So, does anyone want to come in here? Maricuz, you asked the question about neutral. Not all, but a lot of the questions do ask the categories are agree, neutral, and disagree amongst most of the questions. So when we say percentage agree is X%, doesn't mean all the rest of them disagree. Some of them are neutral as well. But we normally talk about aggregate the agree responses. Although in the report it has the breakdown for all three, so you can see it yourself.
I think one of the things that I'd like to pick up on is still the low percentage of students that feel that they work collaboratively online. If we're looking at the skills that students need when they progress into the workplace, online collaboration and group working is such a key part of that these days, and of course with the digital tools as well coming into that. So I'm still interested to see that there is still quite a low percentage of students, a quarter of students never work online with others, and I think that's quite a concerning finding. I think there's still, I'm not seeing any of the indicators that we put in around how technology might be being used more in an interactive, more engaging way. Some of the questions that we put in there as indicators are still showing quite a low level of sort of interactivity. And Helen, I know you used to use the term transactional and transformational learning in relation to digital, and I think we're still seeing what these figures are showing is that there's still quite, I won't say lack of innovation or lack of innovative practice, but it's still fairly doing what we can do, but doing it online. We're not necessarily really fully utilising the way in which technology can transform the classroom.
Helen, you got the comment about the low numbers of students that say they like group work, but there's also somewhere else in the questionnaire that says about the percentage that actually work online with others as well. So I wonder sometimes if it's actually a choice, it's partly a choice of whether they like it, but also what they're actually experienced as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that also relates to assessment. I think we're having some discussions in sort of other areas around assessment activities, and again, if their activities are part of or lead into some assessment of that group task, I think that's where perhaps some of the negativities and some of the barriers might come in perceiving that that they will be judged as a group, not necessarily judged as sort of individuals.
That's interesting finding, Jonathan, about the UK engagement survey. Found peer-to-peer working generally is a stronger predictor of skills development. So it's an important skill, even though people may be reluctant or not getting the chance to actually do it. The technology allows it to happen, but whether it's actually being used or students don't want to is a question to sort of tease out. I'm always wondering about the term digital when we ask them about digital skills are important for their career, because digital, as you know, is quite wide encompassing. Because digital, in one sense, we're thinking about is being able to pick up a new product and being able to use it and feel comfortable. But some people maybe perceive the word digital as data. And is there something going on there where people think, data, I'm not very good at data, which is, culturally within Britain, is quite a strong thing, almost a badge of pride sometimes when it comes to not being good at data. And I wonder how people understand it. although being able to use digital devices and being able to use data are extremely important for future careers.
I think that also that industry standard one is an interesting one to have a little bit of thought around, because in some respects, yes, that is important in relation to having that authentic experience of where students move into the workplace. But there's also that sort of counter argument about saying that actually what systems that we all use today are changing so rapidly that when students move out into the workplace, those industry standard, solutions might be changing already. So in some respects, a lot of the discussion that I've been hearing lately has very much been down to not necessarily training students to know how to use a particular package, but more to be able to support students with being resilient and flexible enough to be able to adapt their working practices to different software packages as these evolve. So, I think it's again moving away from the actual, I can use a piece of software, to having the capability to be able to know how to use that package in order to be able to complete the task I'm needing to do.
Yes, Jess, that's the good point I'm trying to make there. Made it better than me about cause and effect.
I think
something
sorry.
Earlier, to say we don't know whether students who don't like collaborating, and remember the question is in general, it's not about just online, but whether students have had a poor experience of it, whether the students haven't had enough experience of it to know that they could enjoy it. I think Jonathan's finding is really useful, so that when students have had a really good experience of group collaborative work, certainly the qualitative throws up a lot of students saying the best thing I've done, the thing I really enjoy doing is collaborative, particularly collaborative presentations or collaborative project work with wikis. They often come up. So I think when students have a really good experience of it, it tends to be something that they want more of, but we don't know how good an experience lots of students are having.
Tabitha, thanks for lobbing that bomb in. I think that's really interesting. Is it HE's responsibility to create work-ready young adults? We could do a whole webinar on that. I mean, what actions come from this? What actions do FE and HE institutions seeing this? What can they do if it is actually for them to do in the first place?
I think that's an important point, Mark, because I think it's, I think so much of what we designed Insights to be was the so what. So what is this actionable data saying to you in your institution to be able to take back and work collaboratively with your students on, but also at a national level, what could we be doing as GISC, as Advanced HE to help support the sector move forward with this agenda? So I think the so what's are really important here. And, we know from previous experience that these reports are getting a lot of use, a lot of reference, and, the data is actually speaking to senior leaders in terms of then being drivers, for change. So it's important that we get the so what and the recommendations right for the sector.
Yeah. I'm seeing Catherine's comment about questions and modifying in the sense of trying to tease out students' negative experiences, and we can obviously correlate them with other questions next year. That may be something worth looking into.
And I think these are the areas that we said at a local level. These are the areas that I think we always had in mind, Helen, didn't we? To actually, these interesting findings would be what institutions would do some focus group work at a local level to start exploring and unpicking this in a little bit more detail. I would sort of hazard a guess that in some cases it's all down to curriculum design, and if there's not a lot of opportunities within the course around structuring collaborative working and collaborative group work, whether online or offline, that is also down to the course design and linking into the way that tutors are designing and delivering their materials.
Thanks, everyone. I want to carry on this conversation. Actually, I find it personally interesting, but I've got to move on to the next slide. We need longer than an hour. Slide 4. So sorry, go back again. This is our final slide. As you can see, it's pretty packed as well. And also it covers some of the new questions we've asked about mobile phones. And we also asked students to select from a list of options. and what they would like for their learning. And FE learners identified more interactive polls and quizzes in class and practice questions available online. That's most useful. And HE has wanted more practice questions and course-related videos. So are there kind of actionable thoughts around that area? Or the other one was about FE students, maybe not surprising. When they were given a list of options, they were saying that more laptops and tablets available in class are a priority to them, which we would expect when you saw the low laptop personal ownership in the earlier questions.
I was interested by the emphasis on assessment, really. You know, it was just coming through from the FE students saying, you know, they like the quizzes, they like the practice questions. And, you know, I just picked up that it was interesting that, you know, perhaps from a student sense, the priority was lying there about, this is all about me getting through the course. It's about me being assessed and to be, you know, assessment ready. And that, you know, these are giving me opportunities to practice my knowledge and to see how much knowledge and expertise I've acquired. And, you know, again, I think, you know, we're seeing that again coming through with some of the recordings as well. So, you know, I think we can see this both as a positive and a negative. You know, the positive is that students are actually using this to really ensure that they are testing their own knowledge and understanding, and that there is, you know, that space for practice and revision, and, you know, that's sort of a message again that can go back positively to staff that perhaps are a little bit more hesitant about the use of technology, that we can actually show that students are actually, you know, appreciating it. I don't know what others' views are on that. Helen, your thoughts on that one? Do you think more in terms of interactivity than the assessment side?
Well, we haven't done the focus groups. So I did a lot of work with the call on this question about what students would like to change, with trying to chase down some kind of themes that didn't necessarily get very well reflected in what students said, but again, like support, needed to be read through. And interactivity was really one theme I was trying to pick up on. And I think particularly in HE, well, actually, no, in both sectors, I think when now, because of the rise in the use of things like Socrative and Caboodle and Kahoots and, you know, in lecture polling in both sectors, I think when students talk about quizzes and practice questions, they're thinking at least as much about the quality of their experience now as they are about rehearsing for assessment in the future. Because that, if you look at when students are asking for more of those things, where they do make a comment about why, I would say probably slightly more often to do with the quality of their experience. I feel more engaged. It just keeps our attention. It makes it more fun. Much more about that really than about, then there's some about feeling prepared for assessment. Clearly that's also there true. But I think what's really interesting to me is that there's, you know, looking at the qualitative feedback, there's actually a lot more commonality from the two sectors aren't at all the same, but there seems to be a convergence on what the digital experience is in the two sectors. And don't challenge me too much on this one, I haven't really thought it through, but and in HE, it's very much around the interactive lecture experience becoming really important, and having access to those lectures as recordings and as annotated notes for reflection, revision and review. And in FE, it's very much again around the interactivity, the online materials that are going to be interesting and accessible and useful outside of class when I haven't got a teacher alongside. So yeah, I think absolutely those are the things that they're going for, but I would question whether it's all about assessment. I think quite a lot of that is about my experience in the here and now, and wanting it to be more interactive and engaging.
Kate, I'm just looking at your comment there about students coming from school, understand the role of self-testing and retrieval practice. So they're coming into universities or college with more awareness of how students learn amongst students. You're thinking of the polling, etc., and the idea of quizzes itself and the use of tech may change the changing assessment within universities, almost what university is about and what university education is, or maybe that's quite controversial, I don't know. Also at the top here, I mean, it's the positive. We're talking about a lot of issues here, but it's also the idea with very reasonably high percentages. We're saying that they're more independent in their learning with digital is used, and for HE students at least, it helps them fit learning around their life more easily. So I think there's some real positive messages coming out of here as well. Of course, we are focusing on some of the things that need to be improved, but I think we've got to put that into context. I've seen lots of comments on there for Tabitha's work here, so you have a big audience there, Tabitha, for it.
Yes, I think that's an important point, Mark. I think what we are trying to do with the outputs from the analysis is to have the key reports and with all the data in, to have the summaries both for FE and HE. But I think it is then the additional analysis, and certainly if you are interested in the factor analysis and the persona work, do have a look. I'll put the URL in the chat window again. So Tabitha's reports that Tabitha and Helen have been working on to date on last year's data set. And then I know Tabitha's given a few teasers there to the work she's currently doing on this year's data set. So I think, we really do recognise that this is such a valuable source of data to look at how we can pull more from it in the future as well. So I think this is just the starting point.
Thank you, Sarah. There's a comment from Jess about, is there something about using the right tools for the job, in the sense that the polls and quizzes may be more suitable for some programs of study than others? So can it be used inappropriately? Is it not being used in certain programs where it would really be useful for? Is there differentiation by subject?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I think it goes back into what we were saying earlier about course and curriculum design, and I think the comment that students are expecting to see more interactivity in their sort of lectures, and that's where, as Helen's saying, some of this comes in. Yes, I think at a local level, I think it would be really interesting to look at some of those subject differences, and whether there are, greater expectations on some courses, or some courses may still be more traditional.
Yeah. But there's Helen saying here as well, I suppose, that there's some of the things that are being developed can also as well go across subjects. Like diagnosing learning needs could be applicable to most subjects. So some are specific to subject and some of them are general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So quite a bit here. Any other comments? Anyone want to say anything more?
I was just interested in the mobile phone question, because I'm not sure. I think there is something there about the use of, because I think what we're seeing now is that rather than institutions spending a lot of money on their own participant response systems, they are expecting students to use their own mobile devices to then interact with those polling devices like Kahoot or Mentimeter themselves. So I'm not sure if there's something in terms of the question around, the use of mobile phones, whether the data we've got back from that question has been of use, or whether it's sort of almost confirming perhaps what we know. I don't know, but just thinking that there's perhaps something more that you might want to unpick about the mobile access, because I think again that comes back under the VLE questions, or the questions about technology on the course, about still quite low percentages of students that are accessing their VLE by their mobile device. And just thinking whether mobile in itself, whether there is something there that we need to unpick in a bit more detail for next year's data questions.
And there's a question here from Mary Cruz about postgraduate students having a different experience and different learning experience and different needs. Yes, the data itself, we do ask the level of study. It's not going to be in this main report simply because there isn't room for it. We're struggling to fit everything in at the moment. But on the next slide, we're talking about future analysis. I have posed the question that it would be very useful to be able to look at the differences for postgrad and undergrad, etc. So it won't be in this report, but we're pretty likely to do it for separate briefings. Okay. I would move on to the next slide, but I don't think it's going to take 10 minutes. I don't think anything, Sarah, about the different reports we can do. So I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything about this particular slide or any of the themes at all. What's the overall feeling of the actual survey this year?
Any surprises? Anything that's, you know, thinking, oh yes, that's made me think, or that's something actually that I need to look back in your own institutional or organisational context?
Or you think the sector itself will look at it and go, okay, then this is something we need to act upon, or at least look at our own data locally to see what's going on? Just let everyone know this group chat and stuff. I will send it out to everyone afterwards, so you can have a record of it if you want to go back.
Okay, did you want to just expand on that a bit? You said from a local perspective, practice online questions. So is that in relation to what we were saying around what students like in terms of those practice questions? Right. Okay. Yes, that's really interesting, Kate. Is that something that you, as an institution, are starting to bring more into your practice? Because I think that's the other interesting thing about how these findings can then feed into the development of practice going forward, and you know, some of the areas that we want
it's
to
Helen.
have.
I'd like to
Go for it, Helen.
Question, because I really like it develops it for this year, because I think it's quite a shortcut to thinking about how students might want their learning and teaching to change. We struggle to get really high numbers of comments about learning and teaching. Even the question about that tends to be focused a little bit more on infrastructure and access. So it was really nice to think we could get a kind of shortcut to what students want more of in their learning experience. And I think the findings overall suggest that students actually think quite seriously about this. You know, I think our concern was they might just say, oh, you know, give us the videos. And actually, you know, they're going for revision. I mean, I take what you're saying on board, Kate. They might say they want more of them, but do they actually use them if they're there? But here they've got an opportunity to say what they want, and they're going for those opportunities to really consolidate and revise, which is an interesting finding, and you know, a really good reason for going with that, and seeing how digital can. I think revision. I'm just going back. I think the top word in all the responses about learning and teaching was revision, from my memory. So when I tried to identify words that were actually about learning and teaching practice, revision was the top one, or revise or review. So I think thinking about how digital can really reinforce what students are doing in the classroom and in their reading through revision is a nice way for institutions to go.
Thanks, Helen. I'm looking at some of the questions here. So it chimes with Jonathan's point about students wanting, people have been surprised the students are engaged. They do want certain things, but also being comfortable with technology, and the assumption that all students are comfortable, or not all, but the majority are comfortable with technology when when a lot of them aren't. Is something that needs to be thought about. What's hidden under the kind of under the cliches, basically. And also Mary Cruz's points about what she'll take back as well, about the need to improve the basics first, and people sort of moving ahead. There's such differentiation within the sector. The idea of always being leading edge rather than getting the basics done right.
I think it also, I mean, although we shouldn't raise this, but I think it is something that we need to think about. What we have, obviously, are students that are responding to these surveys that are probably already quite keen to use digital, and in a sense, a little bit more. I mean, we've always had this issue, haven't we, Helen, of sort of self-selecting students that then take part in these sorts of surveys, and just thinking about whether there is a group of students that the survey isn't reaching, that perhaps are not as engaged with digital. So it's sort of, engaging the unengaged. I know that relates to a lot of work around student engagement as a whole, but it would just be interesting, wouldn't it, just to get a sense of well, it'd be lovely to do more focus groups to sort of unpick some of this in a bit more detail.
I think Tabitha, and Mark, being the data analyst, will be the first to say that you only have the data in front of you, and we know that doing a survey depends, as we've always said, and I'll leave Tab's remark, it depends a little bit how it's actually launched at the institutions that run it. So there's different ways of sampling, some of which tend to create a more even spread of samples depending on students' preference, particularly if you go into certain target classes or courses and try and get as close to 100% as you can. So it does depend a bit how it's sampled, but I totally take on board what you're saying, Sarah, that we're looking at the more digitally comfortable end perhaps of our students. And so I think that's why when I'm looking at the qual, I try to amplify or certainly to attend to some of the more negative voices, not because I want everyone to feel depressed, but because, you know, some of those outlying concerns may well be reflected at large in students who just aren't engaged with the survey.
Can I just say that it's a Tabitha here. Hello. I know this is only a small sort of component of it, but whilst we may only be getting responses from, I always worry about, as Sarah and Helen and Mark will know, constantly worry about the whether or not our sample is representative of the entire student population. Now, last year we did find a correlation between the NSS overall satisfaction score and our student digital satisfaction score rating. So I don't think that we're off only at speaking to the digitally enthused. I think we do have a representative voice that is providing us with really meaningful, valid data that we can act on. So, I mean, that's what I sort of reassure myself about, you know, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning and I'm worrying about that representativeness.
I mean, from a technical point, there are different ways, you know, we go about it, where institutions go about it. You know, you could take a sample of students rather than asking all your students, and then, but the thing about that though is if you're taking that sample, you're going to have to make sure that you're getting almost 100% response rate on it, which is, you know, very, very hard to do. And the point of the survey is the voice of students. And by taking a sample, you're missing out. Some students or a lot of students will miss out the opportunity to have their voice. So there is a tension going on there as well.
There's some interesting comments just picked up from Jess around assistive technology. I don't know if we want to just go and have a look at that question, Mark.
Right, just going back to Jess's one. The question here is, I mean, the data is telling as the data is, in a sense, I mean, are the findings surprising people? I think the presumption was, Jess is saying that that assistive tech is being used effectively, but here it's suggesting that maybe that isn't the case, or not to the degree that people expect. So, I mean, do the results surprise people? And also, in a sense of so what, are there things that the institutions can do to improve the provision of assistive tech?
And Helen, please do come in here, that would be good.
Okay, so what was interesting this year is that the suggestions that students gave about the assistive tech, and that was very clearly what they were talking about, suggestions that students in FE and HE gave were very different from each other. And I think you'll see that when you see just the word cloud from the report. And I was very puzzled as well by why that would be. And in particular, year on, you know, compared to last year, there's even fewer students citing recognizable assistive software like Dragon and Read and Write Gold and so on. And they're almost all in HE, the ones that talk about that. So what I'm seeing is that FE students are valuing just having a laptop or a tablet with software on it, or just having someone sit down with them and show them how to use assistive features of the devices that they have and use. And I think the same in HE, but maybe in HE there is still more of a practice of, you know, assessing students, taking them away, giving them a piece of software, showing them how to, or hardware. I mean, students in HE were much more likely to have reader pens and stuff like that. So it may partly be a resourcing issue, but it may be that with the less resources in FE are actually doing something really interesting and innovative, which is saying, you know, most software and devices have assistive features. What we really need is to equip our students to understand how to use them, rather than giving them some extra special thing. So we need to do the focus groups to find out what's going on, but I didn't necessarily take the lack of a huge amount, you know, we have to remember what the question is. You know, what really helps you. The students in FE are citing just having digital access as the thing that helps them most, whereas the students in HE are more inclined to talk about some specialist stuff they might have been given. So I don't think that necessarily means that FE isn't doing it well. I think it might be that FE is doing some quite interesting things around the access that students have already.
Thanks, Helen. I'm just going to move on. Thanks for all your comments. We're running out of time, and I want to make sure, Helen, you've got your part at the end that you can speak as well. We've talked about this before. I mean, the actual report itself, you know, has limited space, and then we want to do briefings throughout the year. So the survey itself only looks at HE and FE standard students, doesn't include HE online, simply because they have a very different experience. So it's very hard to compare. So we want to do a briefing paper comparing the two. The year on year, it's going to be in this extra chapter, which we'll share in advance for you. It's been worked on. We can look at the teaching staff and student results by the same questions once we've got the teaching staff data analysed. Again, students by age and gender, we're looking at that, but we can go into more detail, more about the TEF and the NSS. Marie-Cruz, we spoke about the different level of study, postgrad, undergrad, etc. Does anyone have, with the data we have, that can think about what other pieces of analysis that would be very useful from the data that we can do as briefings as part of the year? Right, I can see some comments come in. So Marie-Cruz says campus versus off campus. I mean, the data set itself will say whether they're online or not, but not specifically whether they're on campus or not.
Yeah, no, the reason why perhaps, I don't know if this is not for this kind of survey, but more and more universities, they are offering some online degrees, not only obviously the Open University, and I understand the survey and the question are focused for on-campus students in this case. Yeah, I understand.
So I think it's interesting. We are trying to develop and move on a TNE survey. So there's some of the big institutions are offering these where students are studying in different countries, and it's we're working on it, but it's having enough institutions on board that we can actually have a viable data set to analyse. So it's something we want to push next year. So hopefully, you know, this is sort of watch this space. And if I know, Marie-Cruz, at Heriot-Watt, you have a big presence there. So I mean, it'd be really useful to have you on board, your institution, and you know, and be able to analyse the data next year. And Tabitha, thanks, you've answered my question already. I was about to Jonathan. Okay, any other pieces of analysis? I mean, this is analysis we can do on the existing data set compared to the variables we actually have. And there's some ideas there we're talking about, of course, of what other questions we might want to ask. I mean, one of the questions we're looking into doing is ethnicity, which some people have asked about. We've included it as a question on our evaluation form for people who are doing it this year, because we want to sort of test the water to see if it's something people want or if people think is appropriate. So we're just trying to get some feedback to decide whether we include that question next year. Okay, right. I would like to carry on talking about this, but I know we've only got 5 minutes left, and then it'd be useful Tabs and I just want to speak to Jonathan about some of the ideas of the 3-digit postcode there. So definitely, Jonathan, get back to you about that. So moving on, Helen, you want to come in? Helen's been involved with Tabitha and the rest of the team designing the questions over the years. So Helen wants some feedback from all of you about the value of the questions. So I'll hand over to Helen.
Well, and also hopefully Tabitha will come in, because it's, you know, it's also very much her baby, designing the questions. But we wanted just to check in with you. Obviously, any comments you have about the questions, and some of them we've already picked up, have been really useful. I think just a general one about when you see the report with the qualitative.
I lost you there. I hear you there.
National level as Can you hear me now?
Hear you now again. Yeah, you went off again.
Sorry, it's my Wi-Fi. Yeah, so just very quickly then, in case it goes, what's the value of the sort of national sector level qualitative analysis? Because largely those questions are really to help you focus in on issues locally. the second question, which maybe needs a bit more unpacking, which we don't have time for, but just I'll ask it, is whether we ask a number of questions about the VLE or virtual learning environment, and it's very clear that that is starting to mean quite different things in the two sectors and also in different places. So portals are coming in, which aggregate some of those VLE functions with other functions, particularly in higher education. FE colleges are using a lot of very learning focused systems like Shobi and Google Classroom. So just a question about whether we really want to ask that question in that format still. And I think we've kind of answered number 3, which was really helpful to get some feedback on. So I'm going to see if Tabitha wants to come in, because I know she's had her head buried in this data for an awful long time with you, Mark, and may have some other thoughts as well.
Hello all. I think you've covered it. I mean, really, the VLE question is definitely starting to feel lumbering. There is an evolution in terms of how things that VLEs do is presented as an experience to the students, such that it's just no longer this defined separate entity that, I mean, often, you know, there is a portal, it has a name, usually it has a localized name to do with the name of the institution, and as such, you know, it contains a lot of different components. So it's very easy to look at the technical side of it as the question author, when actually the student experience side is one that's more seamless and more amorphous. I think that, yeah, so I think really so Kate, we're not saying that we would see it go, far from it. We're saying that we think that question needs to evolve to be more actionable. Because what we're finding is that, just quickly, what we're finding is that the number of students that don't answer that question is creeping up. It's becoming more and more abstract, and it's not something that they are understanding. And I always look for the non-response rate. So for that question, we've got up to about 7-8% now, that Mark's found this year, and that's a red flag for me as you know, as the survey author. That, you know, one of the authors, is that we need to do something with that question to make it more valid in the eyes of the students. So if you had any ideas as to how you would reword that in a way that is more actionable for you, but also makes more sense to the students, then please do share that, and we will take that into consideration. Sorry, Mark.
No, I was going to say, Marie Cruz, one of the comments here you said about, I'm trying to find it now, that there's about using the term, I think it's for learning platform. This is the term used. It's the term used by the Higher Education Academy, you said.
Well, when you know that for the fellowship is when you need to provide evidence, they use the term learning platform that encompasses a traditional BLE plus web-based services. I understand what you mentioned about that question and how important it was, but I think BLE is going to become old-fashioned or obsolete as we move to the future, because it's really what we are asking is the main learning platform that the student use. It could be an e-portfolio, it could be Google Class apps. That's what I think using learning platform. Help. Sorry, could you hear what I said? I'm not sure.
Yes. I was waiting for the responses. Sorry. Okay. Helen, was that you coming in there?
No, only with what I've put in there. I mean, I think find a term. The point is to find a term students will recognise. We've always had the issue that, I mean, some of you may remember originally we allowed organisations to adapt the term VLE to whatever it's called locally. And I think that was helpful, but had its own complications. But I think even if we were to do that, those terms that people would want to plug in there wouldn't be talking about the same thing anymore. And I think that's the real issue, that the underlying technologies and platforms are changing, that, you know, we're wondering whether what we need to move towards doing is asking more about the functions that these platforms provide, rather than assuming that they are integrated in a certain way or not integrated in a certain way.
Yeah, just to carry on from Helen there, what we're trying to do when we write a question is we're thinking, how can the student answer this and how will they interpret it? But then on the other side, how can an institution do something useful with that data? And I think what we're finding with the VLE question is that increasingly it's being less and less useful on both sides. So we need to try and tighten it up somehow so that it has more meaning to the students and is more actionable to an institution. So one of the questions we put in that we hoped might be more actionable is on the slide here, number 3. Which of these would be most useful to you out of the options we gave? And that was a forced answer question, so students had to choose one that they thought would be most useful to them. And I guess Helen and I are thinking, how useful is that question? Is that one of the things that could be of value to an institution? Are there other things that we haven't asked? Are there any options in that question that we haven't asked? I don't know whether anyone has any ideas about how that specific question might work well or not for them.
Okay. A lot of relief there about the questions, Dane. I'm just conscious of time as it's gone past 3 o'clock. Any last comments for anyone about the questions? Okay, I can move on. Okay, I just want to say thanks to everyone for attending. There's, as usual, an hour's not enough, and we've got so much useful information. So I will send out the recording, and I'll also send out the group chat as well. We're currently working on an extra chapter, additional analysis, some high level. I was going to share it because we're still working on it, but what I will do is share it with all of you in advance of the formal launch, so you can have an advanced look at it. Just as I said before, the actual report will be launched at AltC conference in Edinburgh on the 3rd of September. Hope loads of you can make it, and I've also got my email address there in case you have any other questions. So if you have any other ideas that come from this that you think about afterwards, any feedback, especially around ideas of what is the data telling us, what can institutions use from this to make actions, the so what's, etc., please do get back to me in the next few days while we finalize the report. And just to say thanks to everyone, thanks for all your ideas, thanks for your time. As always, it's been really, really valuable, and thanks really for over the both of the expert groups and stuff. It's been a real success, so thanks a lot. See you, bye from everyone. Okay, take care, bye.